Greetings from Palestine. My name is Omar Barghouti. I'm one of the founders of the Palestinian-led global boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. I want to thank the Green Party for passing a BDS resolution a couple of months ago, breaking a major taboo in the Canadian public sphere on Palestinian rights, on solidarity with Palestinian rights, and the most effective ways to stand in solidarity with the right of Palestinians to freedom, justice, and equality. Allow me to say that the Green Party, by breaking this taboo, is reminding Canadians, and indeed many others, that doing no harm is an ethical, moral obligation. It is not a matter of charity. When Greens in Canada push for divestment from companies that are involved in Israel's occupation and denial of Palestinian rights, they're doing the right thing. They're ending their complicity in something that is criminal, that violates international law, because that's exactly what BDS is calling for. It is calling for isolating Israel's regime of occupation, settler colonialism, and apartheid until Palestinians enjoy our UN stipulated rights, which we are entitled to under international law, just as the boycott campaign against apartheid South Africa was intended to and indeed contributed to ending the system of apartheid so that South Africans, especially the black majority, could enjoy equal rights and enjoy justice. BDS was established in 2005 by the absolute majority of Palestinian civil society. Political parties, trade unions, women's unions, academics, artists, students, farmers, and so on and so forth. All of us called for isolating Israel's regime academically, culturally, economically, militarily, until it ends its 1967 occupation of Palestinian territory and Syrian territory as well, because the entire world recognizes that this occupation is illegal and must come to an end. Number two, ending Israel's system of apartheid. It has more than 50 racist laws in the state of Israel itself that discriminate against its non-Jewish citizens, the indigenous Palestinian citizens of the state of Israel. We're calling for ending that system of apartheid and giving equal rights to the Palestinian citizens as well. The third right that BDS calls for is the right of Palestinian refugees, the UN stipulated right of Palestinian refugees to return to their homes of origin, as called for by UN General Assembly Resolution 194. This is a right that's recognized by the world, and Israel must respect and enable Palestinian refugees to return in order to have justice and therefore a sustainable peace that is based on justice. Martin Luther King Jr. once said that boycott at a very basic level is withdrawing cooperation with a system that is evil. Indeed, that's what the Green Party supporters of BDS are calling for. They're not calling for discrimination against anyone. They're calling for isolating a system of injustice, a system of oppression, withdrawing cooperation with a system of injustice. And that's a moral duty. It's not a charity. Uh, um, Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa once said, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. Indeed, by doing nothing, Canadian citizens, as taxpayers, are subsidizing Israel's regime of oppression, its war crimes in Gaza, its demolition of homes in occupied East Jerusalem, its demolition of entire communities in the Naqab or Negev desert in the south where Palestinian Bedouins, citizens of Israel, dwell without basic rights. So by doing nothing, you are inadvertently supporting this regime of occupation, settler colonialism, and apartheid to continue. So it is incumbent ethically and otherwise upon every conscientious person, every liberal person, every progressive person in Canada to stand with the right to end the complicity in Israel's crimes. This is a right, it's a duty that we're calling on every Canadian to stand with. Since 2005 until now, we've achieved quite a lot with this non-violent, human rights abiding movement, the BDS movement. In the academic and cultural sphere, we've seen many academics and cultural figures refusing to play in Tel Aviv, refusing to participate in events in Tel Aviv. Naomi Klein is a great example of such support for BDS among Canadian cultural figures. Similarly, many figures in the UK, South Africa, India, the US, of course, across Europe, across the Arab world, in South Korea, Japan, Australia, have come out in support of the academic and cultural boycott of Israel, including many very prominent Jewish intellectuals and academics. And we're very proud of Jewish support for BDS, which is growing exponentially, especially among younger Jewish Americans and elsewhere around the world. One example of that is J Street, the Israel Soft Lobby, had a poll in September 2014 that showed that 46% of non-Orthodox Jewish American men under the age of 40 support a full boycott of Israel to end its occupation and violation of Palestinian human rights. And again, we're very proud of that support. Jewish Israeli support for BDS is growing, and although it is still small, it is very significant, and that's why Israel has passed an anti-BDS draconian law that suppresses freedom of speech. And Israel is exporting that McCarthyist system of suppressing freedom of speech and freedom of association to Europe, to Canada, to the US, working with governments, working with elected officials that owe a lot in their election to lobby money, working with them to suppress the basic civil rights of Canadian citizens, European citizens, American citizens by delegitimizing BDS and by trying to suppress it from above, by government, by parliament, by passing resolutions that induce a chilling effect on everyone that calls for Palestinian rights and calls for effective measures, especially BDS, to achieve those rights and to end complicity in maintaining Israel's regime of oppression. But Israel started dealing with BDS as having a strategic impact on its entire system of injustice in the last couple of years, because the movement has moved beyond academic and cultural isolation of Israel that is growing very fast to the beginning of an economic isolation of Israel's regime of oppression. In the last couple of years alone, we've seen major pension funds across the world, including the pension fund of the United Methodist Church, the Presbyterian Church, the PGGM, the second largest Dutch pension fund, Norwegian sovereign fund, and many, many major pension funds across the world divest from companies, from banks, whether Israeli or international, that are profiting from Israel's occupation and apartheid. That's a very important step forward. The Bill Gates Foundation, for example, has divested from G4S, a security company involved in securing Israel's prisons, checkpoints, and illegal colonies in the occupied Palestinian territory. We've seen major corporations like Veolia pull out of Israel entirely after losing billions upon billions of dollars in tenders and contracts across the world, thanks to effective, strategic, ethical BDS campaigning in Sweden, the UK, Ireland, the US, Kuwait, and many other places across the world. Soon after Veolia pulled out, Orange Telecommunications pulled out of Israel, and so did the Irish company CRH. Also, G4S has announced that it plans to pull out next year, but we do not believe them, so we'll continue pursuing them until they actually pull out. And G4S is a good example of intersectional struggles. It is also involved in private prisons, in the massive private incarceration system in the United States and elsewhere, which makes it a natural target for the Black Lives Matter movement, for Latino movement, for the immigrants' rights movement in the US and elsewhere. So we're building bridges of solidarity. We're building bridges of joint struggle with indigenous communities in Canada and the US, with feminist groups, LGBTQ groups, anti-war groups, liberal groups across the board, facing the common enemy, if you will, large multinationals that profit from suppressing our rights, from denying us gender justice, economic justice, social justice, and so on and so forth. So in response to Israel's model of militarization and securitization that's being exported to the world, we have to stand for our struggles together for social justice, for economic justice. The money that Canada, the US, Germany, Britain are spending on subsidizing Israel's war machine can better be spent to save the environment, to have climate justice, to create jobs, to give a modicum of justice to the indigenous communities in Canada and elsewhere. This is money that should be spent domestically for progress, for social change domestically, not to support a war machine like Israel's machine. So ultimately, we're calling on all Canadians to end complicity of their institutions, of their government eventually, in Israel's regime of oppression. This is an ethical duty. We call on other parties in Canada, on all progressive institutions, to join the Green Party in adopting effective BDS measures that end this complicity and go beyond that to stand in solidarity with the Palestinian struggle for freedom, justice, and equality. This movement is inclusive. It is anchored in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. As such, it rejects every form of racism, anti-Indigenous racism, anti-Black racism, anti-Arab, anti-Muslim racism, and indeed anti-Jewish racism. We do not work with anti-Semites. We do not accept anti-Semites in our ranks, and we categorically reject anti-Semitism. Everyone who is trying to say that a boycott against Israel, which is a regime of occupation and oppression, is anti-Semitic, is making an anti-Semitic remark by claiming implicitly that Israel and all Jews are one and the same, as if Israel represents all Jewish communities, as if there's no human diversity among Jewish communities. And that's an anti-Semitic statement. There are many progressive Jewish Canadians, Jewish Americans that stand with Palestinian rights, with the BDS movement to achieve those rights. We encourage everyone in Canada to join the BDS movement for everyone's equality and for justice. Thank you.